Tonight, we have Dr. Graziella Parati, who is the Paul D. Paganucci Professor of Italian Literature and Language at Dartmouth College. Her books include Public History, Private Stories, Italian Women's Autobiography, Mediterranean Crossroads, Migration Literature in Italy, New Perspectives in Italian Cultural Studies, Italy and the Cultural Politics of World War I, and Migrant Writers in Urban Space in Italy, Proximities and Affect in Literature and Film. And she's currently working on a book titled Unbecoming Fascists, The Use of Political Autobiographies in Nation Building. And Dr. Parati is also a member of the Board of Directors at New Hampshire Humanities. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Parati for tonight's program, How to Be a Fascist.
Well, thank you so much, Tricia, for your presentations. I put a very provocative title to this talk because I knew it would attract people. I am not teaching anybody how to be a fascist. So this is not a lesson how to become one, but rather it's a lesson of what fascism has done to the world and how it came about. So let me start with going to the first slide that we have right here. It is a picture of somebody you would probably recognize, although you're familiar with him as bald with no hair whatsoever. Here he has some hair, and he will always have some hair throughout his life. He always shaved his head because a fascist leader could not age. So there should not be any gray hair on his head. So why is it that the leader of the first type of fascist government became so popular and turned himself into literally a star, an idol, a demigod in all this? Well, in order to understand fascism, we have to understand World War I. Because the roots of fascism lie in what happened in World War I, the war that was supposed to end all wars. Of course, you know who was fighting with whom. And this is a time when Italy was actually siding with the winning side of the war, with France and England, and of course, the United States, starting from 1917. However, Italy came into the war with a specific plan that actually failed. Italy had been unified very recently. 1870 is the last date in which Italy acquired territory, which was the Pope state at the time. And Italy wanted additional territory in order to unify itself. What are the issues here in a place like Italy? Well, Italy, like Greece, like Spain, were always considered the south of Europe, more Northern African in many ways, including racially speaking, than the rest of Europe. It was the place of the Grand Tour where everybody was going to educate themselves in order to see the monuments, but they were not supposed to intermingle with the people. The people were some kind of barbarians that did not reflect the fame and the conquest of the monumental glory of Italy that was present. Therefore, whether it was in Italy or it was in the United States where Italians migrated, Italians were not considered really white. And therefore, this idea of a war to which Italy participated would give Italy additional territory that for Italy was the northeast of the country, would sort of help in making Italy prove itself militarily, so it would be more European, it would be allied with sort of the right people in Europe, and therefore it would be part of a process of whitening of itself and also of making the country more European. So the war ended in 1918 and the peace treaty started being discussed, and Italy was present, but also not present at the same time because its representatives left the meeting because Italy was now getting the territory that it wanted. And therefore, this is known in Italy as the mutilated war. So the political representatives didn't do the job that they wanted, and the soldiers came back from the war after losing an incredible number of soldiers during World War I. They came back and they were very unhappy with the results of the peace treaty. And they came back to a country in trouble. The economy was doing very badly, was doing badly before the war, still doing badly after the war. So there are very few jobs for the soldiers. So they come back. Women had worked in factories at the time, so they'd proven themselves that they could do the job the men were doing before. Of course, they all get kicked out of the industry. They're supposed to go back to very traditional roles. But this sort of experience remains, and the idea of masculinity that was there before is again weakened by this role that women had played. They had done men's job. Okay, they're gone, but they still did men's job. The peace is a mutilated peace, sort of a castration of the kind of victory that the country wanted to have. And the soldiers who had fought so hard for it feel the consequences of that. Again, another weakening of the fatherland, as the propaganda before and during the war had promised. It would only be glory for the country itself. So the soldiers come back, the country is in shambles, and there is one party that is very attractive for all of these people. No, it's not the fascist party, it is the socialist party. Why is socialism so attractive in 1819 and 1919? Well, socialism in Europe was born as a pacifist movement. But because of patriotism during World War I, in Germany, in Great Britain, and in France, socialists decided that the country, fighting for the country, was more important than fighting for their socialist ideals and for pacifism, that particular ingredient of socialism. All of the country, all of the workers made this choice, but the Italian socialists. The Italian socialists remained pacifists. So here are the soldiers who are very disappointed with the war, but also with the experience of the war. Italy had very little money, so always underfed the soldiers. So it was a terrible experience on all fronts. So the soldiers come back and socialism seems very attractive. And the numbers within socialism increase. 1819 is a year of an incredible number of strikes, but it is also the year in which fascism was founded. It was founded in Milano, in Piazza San Sepolcro. By whom? By a number of men. And this is very important, that there are so many men as members of fascism, because a very specific idea of masculinity will be predominant in fascism. And also there is money coming from very particular people, which is the rich people, industrialists, who are terrified of the success of socialism in Italy. And therefore, they have to put a stop to it. Well, why is socialism so frightening? Well, you can probably answer that question yourself. 1917, the Russian Revolution. There is a very little discrimination in understanding on the part of the average person, but also on the part of the industrialists, that socialism is not Marxism, it's not communism. If socialism is a pacifist party, therefore is a non-revolutionary party, because a revolutionary party means that it accepts the use of violence in gaining power. Socialism was a pacifist movement, but it is a threat. It is a threat to the status quo, to who has control over the whole country's money, and therefore it has to be fought. Is Italy the only country that is going through this moment in which everybody's terrified of socialism? No, or communism or whatever, any left-wing movement. No, of course, you have the same thing in the United States, right? At the beginning of the 1920s, you have a lot of pushback against against radicalism, and some of that radicalism is represented by Italian Americans within the United States. So this new party, fascism, is founded, and at the head of it, there is supposed to be a man called Bianchi. Well, his last name is White, and his personality was as interesting as his last name, very bland, and therefore he cannot be the leader of the movement. They needed somebody with a lot of charisma, and here it is, Benito Mussolini, a former socialist who was the director of Avanti, the socialist newspaper. He got kicked out together with other people because it was in favor of supporting Italian intervention in World War I. He left, he served in the war as a private, and then after the war, he gathered around himself a number of people, founded a newspaper, Popolo d'Italia, the people of Italy, and then he started his own to lead this new group of people, the fascists. Well, fascism at the beginning is a very innovative group of people. It is made up of an innovative group of people. Why am I shying away from using the word party? Well, it presents itself as the party that is against being a party. So it's a group of people who present themselves as being very revolutionary. In this case, I'm intending the word as in wanting to change everything, but also revolutionary in the sense that they could use any means to achieve that, including violence. And they will use that to an incredible level within the country itself. So the elections come and fascism doesn't do very well. It will take another election at the beginning of the 1920s because some support for fascism will appear. And at that point, fascism has to make a decision about what the priority is. And you will hear me use the word ideology or fascist ideology with sort of, I don't know. I don't want to use that expression because it is very hard to think of fascism as a movement having a definite ideology. It does not. Fascism is very opportunistic. So it will be quick to leave behind the manifesto that they created in 1919 that was talking also about extending the right to vote to large masses, including women. Fascism of the 1920s will have nothing in common of fascism of the manifesto of 1919. It is opportunistic because the goal is to achieve power, and therefore fascism is programmatic. You're not going to find a deep thinker creating any philosophy of fascism itself. There will be one philosopher connected with fascism, Italian fascism, that is Giovanni Gentile, who then will become the education minister, but he will work with education. He will work in philosophy, but he will not supply the ideological backbone of the party itself. Yes, he collaborated with it and supported it, but although he is the one well-known philosopher, he will not create the ideology of the movement itself. So how does fascism gain power? Well, in 1922, fascism achieves some votes. It is encouraged by this and decides to march on Rome. So they decide to perform a coup d'etat. And the problem is right at this moment, because the king of Italy is a kingdom at the time, could have said, who are these aggressive, ridiculous people who go around wearing a black shirt and they behave in a sort of pseudo-military way or paramilitary way, because they definitely armed themselves. They had the money to do that. I, as the king of Italy, will arrest him, right? Put him in jail. This is an attempt to coup d'etat. He didn't do so. He welcomed Mussolini and gave him the power, made him prime minister, and therefore declared openly what was known at the time, that is that the king was a supporter of the fascists, and him and his wife will be until 1943. So we're talking about a support that will last about 20 years and will cost the monarchy the crown. There is no doubt about that. So here we are, 1922, Mussolini becomes prime minister and programmatically chips away to the parliamentary structure, because Italy has a constitutional kingdom, so it has a parliament, a constitutional monarchy, sorry, and therefore chips away to that until 1924, when new elections are called for. These are highly manipulated elections, and it is the culmination of the armed campaign that the black shirts, which is the fascism, private police, that they only report to Mussolini and nobody else. And they ran a violent campaign against the socialists, killing them, burning their cultural houses. It is a very daily, very violent campaign. So 1924 comes around. The elections are manipulated. People who don't vote for fascism get physically punished. Fascism wins. And there is one socialist who stands up in parliament and accuses Mussolini of being a murderer. And his name is Giacomo Matteotti. If you go to Italy, there are tons of streets or squares devoted to Giacomo Matteotti. Giacomo Matteotti immediately gets kidnapped and is found dead in a ditch the day after. So 1924, with this act, is the end of what came before. It is the triumph of fascism through a use of violence. So we have found two ingredients that are very important with fascism: a particular kind of masculinity that is aggressive, that is highly irrational, that is highly malleable and programmatic. So that is very, very important. And the other one is, I can't remember, it will come back to me. But sometimes when I speak, I forget what I'm talking about. But anyway, so there is this use of violence, and there is this use of imposing one particular point of view, that is the point of view of the leader. Everything is centralized in this figure of the leader. And there is a use of the system in order to gain power. So the other ingredient of fascism, it is to be absolute. That's to have absolute control. No other points of view are accepted. We are not in 1924 at the point when fascism is a dictatorship. It will become a dictatorship gradually, in particular starting from 1926. Because in 1926, freedom of expression is highly curtailed, canceled altogether, I would say. Not that before Mussolini, there was a complete freedom of expression. We're still in a monarchy, we're still in a regime, we're still limited number of people who could vote. men could vote if they had a certain income, they had a certain education. But in 1926, everything is wiped away. It is the beginning of the dictatorships. Newspapers get closed. No other opinion is accepted apart from the opinion that comes from fascism. Fascism becomes the only party in Italy, and we move on from there. Now, what is happening in Germany, right? Which is the other place where fascism triumphed at some point. But right now, what we have in Italy is, sorry, this is a picture of Mussolini with fewer hair. And here is, we'll go to Germany. What is going on in Germany in the 1920s? We need to go back to World War I, and you're gonna get really bored with me because I need always to go back to World War I. Germany is defeated in World War I. In the 1920s, Nazism creeps up with Hitler and his people. And what is spread all over Germany is the idea that there are very specific reasons and there are very specific people that cause the defeat in World War I. And it is the Jews. The Jews plotted, according to Hitler, to weaken Germany and weaken German virility because the Jews feminize the traditional German men. And that's why the German men were defeated during the war. Here you see another characteristics of fascism. It doesn't make sense, right? It really doesn't make sense. What do you mean? There is a small group of people that caused the defeat of Germany. So there is this creation of a rhetoric that people irrationally embrace. And the book that Hitler comes up with that is supposed to be the ideological backbone of Nazism does not make sense. It's a rant. It's a rant that I don't know who can read it and rationally be convinced of the value of Nazism. And therefore, here you have again this sort of pretend of having a very clear philosophical line, but it's really not there. It will be a programmatic movement. What is added to Nazism that is not there in fascism is the racial component that will come very much later in Italian fascism, but it's already there in Nazism. And the reason is World War I, of finding a reason why the powerful German soldiers were defeated. And they were defeated by this plot, this Jewish international plot. And it will be represented in newspapers, in pseudo art, in ads, in whatever. It will be represented more and more, this internal enemy that is the Jew. So as Hitler sees the success of fascism in Italy, he tries his own coup d'etat, not enough people. So in 1924, Hitler is in prison for attempting this coup d'etat. And also he sends a letter to Mussolini asking for Mussolini's autograph, which Mussolini refuses to him. He will not send one. And Mussolini is very critical of this anti-Jewish stance of Nazism because fascists of the first hour are also Italian Jews that embrace fascism because fascism presents itself as nationalistic, presents itself as having as a goal the glory of the nation. It is, again, a male nation, and it is a violent nation. This is very important in fascism in all its forms. violence and the right of men to violence. And there will be very prescriptive roles for women, very different for Italian women than German women, but they will be there. They are necessary in the Weltanschauung of fascism, in the view of the world of fascism. So let's go back to Italy. And how does fascism sustain itself in Italy? Well, it is cunning. It is very cunning, right? It is a movement that is anti-religion at the beginning. Nazism will always be that way. It will embrace paganism. It will be fascinated by the Middle Ages, sort of these dark ages, you know, in particular would be fascinated with Northern European Middle Ages. So in Italy, fascism needs the support of the king, and it will have for as long as it was possible. And then it has to deal with the issue of the Catholic Church, the power of the Catholic Church. Catholicism is the only accepted religion in Italy. So how do you deal with that? And do they do they end up clashing? Well, at the beginning, it's a little bit of a problem. Fascism wants to dominate the life of Italians. Fascism has no ideology, but it builds itself as a religion. Oh, what am I saying? That it functions, it copies the way in which religions function. It is not something that you can embrace or cannot embrace. No, it is something that tells you how to live your daily life. It tells you how to eat. It tells you how to dress. It tells you what to do. It tells you where to go to school. It tells you what to do after school. And that clashes with the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church has activities for children for after school, for that period. The church functions in the same way. Religion functions the same way. It is there to tell you what to do every minute of your life. And fascism learns from this. So it is somehow clashing with the Catholic Church. And how is it going to create a compromise? Well, in a very, very cunning way. It is amazing what they did. So let me go back to 1870. The King of Italy could not care less about the church, marches with his army into Rome to occupy it because he wants Rome as its capital, blah, blah, blah. The country has to be unified. The Pope is really upset, has lost all its power in every possible and imaginable sense, doesn't have an army anymore, doesn't have territory, but he has one weapon. He excommunicates the king. So here you have the King of Italy, the king of a Catholic country who was excommunicated. The king says, I couldn't care less, and you know what I do? I'm emancipating the Jews. So the Jews become part of political, military life of Italy. They're Italian aristocrats, they're Italian landowners, they're Italian. They can do anything they want. And they are, in a way, true nationalists, because they are in a country that emancipated them, when in the rest of Europe, you are dealing with a lot of anti-Jewish movements. So the Pope is not happy. So he decides to lock himself in the Vatican, and a Pope will not come out of the Vatican until the bombing of a particular area of Rome in 1943. So you have practically more than 50 years in which the Pope refuses to set foot in Italy. It's a sort of a schism within Italy. Italians, what do they do? Do they listen to the Pope? Or do they listen to the excommunicated king? If they participate in political life, they're excommunicated too, because they are, you know, on the side of the king and of the monarchy. And so fascism understands this. Fascism understands that in order to have an enormous appeal for Italian. It has to make peace with the Pope and with the Vatican. 1929, the Vatican Pacts. Mussolini signs a pact with the church. And why does the church want to sign this pact? Aha, because fascism declares Catholicism the religion of the state. Everybody that goes to school has to attend this religion hours. But also politically, it connects the state and the church very closely. Has Mussolini become a Catholic? Not really. I mean, this is really a political move. This has nothing to do with profound beliefs in religion. This is a tactical move. This is a programmatic move. It gives glory to the king because the king is still there. Mussolini is just prime minister. And it gives power to fascism. Look what fascism has done. It has made peace with the church, and the king hadn't been able to do it between 1870 and 1929. So it's an enormous glory. Mussolini recognizes the role of the church in after-school times, but he will make it mandatory for children, both men and women, to support, take part in paramilitary training in order to turn the boys into real fascists, to embrace the values of fascism, extreme masculinity, use of violence, a very particular interpretation of femininity as negative, as everything that has to be fought against. So women are more and more pushed to the margin of society and given roles that would connect them to maternity and to assistance to the men. They could become nurses, but at the same time, let me complicate life for you. Fascism dominates, but fascism also has its own problems. So if in the countryside, this idea of femininity is predominant because it fits into agricultural society somehow, in the cities, it didn't work. It didn't work. During the years of fascism, we keep having an ever increasing number of women who go to university. Fascism, for example, doesn't decide for a long time what kind of culture and cultural artifacts it will embrace. Is it going to embrace an art that is modernist art, even abstract art, or rationalism in architecture, all those very square buildings? Or is it going to embrace monumentalism, that is creating buildings like the picture you saw at the beginning of this type of architecture built in Germany? Or will it embrace other forms? And fascism in Italy never chooses. So there are some holes in this programmatic agenda which are unheard of in Nazism. Why? Here we see Mussolini during the March on Rome. Here we see Hitler with his book. And here is what Nazism is saying it is confronting. Very different from Italy. Before Nazism, there is the Weimar Republic. It is a type of republic that is seen by Nazis as decadent, as feminine, as homosexual, as everything that Nazism will fight against. So it will choose very specific cultural forms to represent itself. That is realism, those, allow me to say this, very boring landscape that Hitler could paint as a painter, not very good as a painter, but he could do that, to paint landscapes, sort of traditional ways of representing the world. Let's think of the art that is selected by a regime as the art that represents the worldview, or the way, the filter through which they want to see the world. So what the Weimar Republic has created has to be completely canceled. So when Nazism comes to power in 1933, it is very clear in favoring a very particular way of representing itself. So that will not happen in Italy. Also, when we're talking about cinema, there will be also much more flexibility in the kind of movies that were created during fascism than there was in Germany. What you have within fascism is the training of film directors that will become the stars of Italian neorealism after World War II. They learned during fascism. And one of the reasons why is that one of Mussolini's sons, he had a number, really loved cinema. And so he founded his own journal, cinema journal. You know, he wasn't really the sharpest knife in the drawer. So in this journal, he ended up publishing articles about cinema that were written by people who will become the big thinkers of post-fascist Italy after the war. So in a way, they managed to train during fascism because, you know, they escaped that kind of control because there was the possibility of doing this. Let me be clear, however, fascism was a dictatorship, killed people, put people in prison. It has a secret police. It was run as a dictatorship. If you openly disagreed with the regime, you would be killed. You would be imprisoned. But because, I don't know, for cultural reason, historical reason, there was the possibility for some voices not to be completely silenced during fascism. And sometimes it was the stupidity of the censors. I mean, if you accept the job as a censor, you're not, again, the sharpest knife in the drawer. I mean, who's going to accept that job? Come on. So even in the 1920s, there were some novels that were clearly anti-fascist that were published. One was, on top of everything, a novel about a lesbian relationship. Unthinkable but it was such a difficult novel to understand. It was written in a language it was really understand, that they realized that it was a lesbian novel 2 years after it was published and distributed. So this bizarre things happens within fascism, although it is a serious dictatorship. And after World War II, people kept saying, oh, we were never fascist. Let's make sure that people know that for 20 years, there was a lot of consensus of fascism. So it had a base made of Italians that supported it. So there is support from below. For Germany, we come to 1933 and we have an election. Hitler is elected. So let's not, we have to really confront this, is that people have backed dictatorships. And we're focusing on Italian and German dictatorship, but we can think of Salazar in Portugal, 1933, too, supported, of course, by the army and by the Catholic Church. It will continue until 1968 because it has this support of the armed forces and the Catholic Church. Spain, 1936, 1975, when Franco dies, So two very long fascist dictatorships who modeled themselves on Italian fascism and German fascism. And they last for such a long time. Why? Because they didn't enter World War II. And because, so they were not involved in the catastrophe that World War II was, and because the Catholic Church will always remain very, very closely connected with fascism. So let's go back to Germany. 1933, elections. Once Hitler gets elected, he starts grabbing power. He becomes the most powerful person. And Nazism has a very clear plan from the very beginning. It will eliminate all freedoms within the country. It will think of a final solution of the Jews from the very beginning. The first idea, as Hannah Arendt writes in her work, is to actually push the Jews out of Germany. So send them somewhere else. This project is tried, but it's too difficult. And therefore, the idea of killing the Jews will predominate and will be organized by the regime. The other idea that is very important is Germany has to arm itself again. It has to be a powerful country again. And the treaties after World War I decreed that Germany wouldn't have the right to rearm itself. So Germany is definitely breaking the treaties that were signed at the end of World War I. And you have a very speedy, very fast building of Germany as a military power again during very few years. So why did Italy connect with Germany? It is very clear that by 1934, the balance of power has shifted, that it is Hitler that is the main leader of fascism, not Mussolini anymore. And Italy tries to catch up and to keep up with this nationalistic glory that was at the center of its rhetoric. And so in 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia. Why does it invade Ethiopia? Because it's cunning again. At the end of the 18th century, Italy had already tried to occupy Ethiopia. And it is fabulous that the Italian army is the first European army defeated by an African army. So I'm so proud. And at the end of the 19th century, you have this first incredible victory of an African army that defeats this sort of Southern Europeans that try to conquer. Of course, this is a stain on the reputation of the country itself. So Mussolini decides, okay, we the fascists, we the superior, violent, exceptional fascists will do what Italy could not do in the 19th century. So Italy goes to Ethiopia, invades the country. Keep in mind that the country was never pacified, but of course, fascism, dictatorship had control of the press. So the only point of view published would be that it was a great success in Ethiopia. It was fantastic. Everything went very well. Italy is now in an empire. There you go. And it serves the fascist rhetoric that embraces symbolism that comes from the Roman Empire. Fascism is now as powerful, pretends or acts, performs its power as if it were the new Roman Empire. And all the symbols of the Roman Empire are right there in fascism, and they will be inserted in every corner of architecture in Italy, everything that is being created. And Mussolini himself wanted to be, again, sort of a hero on the line of Roman tradition. So at the beginning, he presents himself as Julius Caesar, the new Julius Caesar. But then being an elementary school teacher, he soon realizes his mistake, right? What happened to Julius Caesar? He got, he was stabbed, he was killed, right? Because he was killing the Roman Republic and the empire was starting through him. So Mussolini changes his mind and decides, oops, I don't want to be Julius Caesar anymore. So he decided his idol is Augustus. So there is this, you know, and he remakes Rome in order to create a whole square where Augustus's tomb is recreated. So again, you see fascism as being very opportunistic. Let's use what is useful for us. Nazism has some advantages over Italy. It does not have to appease the church at all. At all. It does not have to have its approval separate. So Nazism is open to embrace something else. Paganism will be very important, but also in the mores, in the daily behavior of the people, it will not be the same way as fascism. Fascism, for example, in the way that it constructed the role of women, it will always have to look at Catholicism in order to make things fit, right? Nazism, no. I mean, Nazism pushes women to have children out of wedlock and wants them to mate with, you know, the stereotypical German blonde, blue-eyed guy, because the country needs children. So it does not care where you're married or not. You're a blonde woman with blue eyes, go and have sex with all this SS soldiers and create as many children as possible for them. So you see how Nazism functions according to very, very different rules. Racism. We said that fascism at the beginning is not born, Italian fascism is not born as racist. Nazism is. Italy will embrace racist policies in 1938. And after the war, it was very convenient to say, oh, it's just because Italy wanted to connect more with Germany, wanted to appease Germany. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. Anti-Semitism in history, in Italy, has a long history. The dates to before the Middle Ages. I mean, it is very long. In 1938, what happens is that the dictatorship in Italy cannot deliver what it promised. It promised to fix the economy. No. It certainly didn't fix it. It did. It said that it had fixed the economy, but it didn't. And therefore, after 1935, there is a little bit of a dwindling of support for fascism. So what it needed was a glorious war in Ethiopia. Great, we are an empire now. What it needed was also to create an internal enemy. And the internal enemy is also always a vulnerable group, the Jews, betraying those Jews that had been members of fascism from the very beginning. So let's never forget that fascism will do what is convenient for fascism, what is convenient to maintain fascism in power. It is violent, it is predominantly male, it is very prescriptive. There will be rules absolutely for everything. It will build itself as a religion, using the same tool that religion used to construct itself, and then it will change and modify itself when it is convenient to do so, and when it is convenient in order to maintain power. And we also have said that rationality and thinking is not exactly its forte. what fascism and Nazism use all the time is emotions, is the manipulation of emotions. And although they never accomplished what they said that they would do, they always find a way to distract you, to give you an emotional set of, I don't know, ingredients, sentiments, emotions, affect that will continue sustaining it. And it will make people think beyond what they are rationally seeing. I mean, let's take Hitler, right? He's thinking about a superior race, a perfect race, biologically superior. I mean, look at him. I mean, let's go back to Hitler. Your eyes see this person and you believe, you are made believe and you embrace it, that he is the leader of a superior race, physically, biologically, right? The hero, the model of Nazism is the tall, blonde, blue-eyed, muscular man. I mean, look at him. It is anything but. So if you think about it, it doesn't work. But it is not your mind that they are talking to. And I don't want to talk about what is going on today in the world, but we have plenty of examples of this, right? They are not appealing to your scientific knowledge. They're not appealing to your cultural knowledge. They are not appealing to your historical knowledge. They are not appealing to your critical thinking because, and this is very important, fascism, Nazism, they are talking to a mass. They are not talking to individuals. Fascism and Nazism embrace the kind of populism in which the leader does not listen to the mass. The leader is the mass, does not need to talk to the mass. The leader tells the mass what they have to think. So within individualism in Nazism and fascism is selfishness. You don't think with your own head. You follow the mass. You will wear a uniform. And although Mussolini was just a private in World War I, he will invent a uniform for himself that doesn't exist and will decorate himself with glory, you know, multicolored medals that he never got, that however are somehow invented. And Hitler will also imitate the kind of performance that Mussolini had in Italy as the leader of fascism. He will invent, you know, colorful uniform for himself as well. And therefore, this is how in order to sustain the power, it has to work. You are a member of a mass, you will obey orders, you will parade, you will be part of order. Salazar in Portugal always said, order is beauty. And that order is designed by the leader of fascism. And here we go. The war is around the corner. 1939, Germany starts occupying territories. What is Italy going to do? But why is Italy not looking at Great Britain or France? And let's not forget, Great Britain and France and the United States were very thrilled when Mussolini gained power because they thought, here is the man who's going to solve all Italy's problems. And we want Italy to solve problems, right? So why isn't it looking at those countries? Well, there are many reasons, but one of them is 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia and the League of Nations issues sanctions against Italy. And so those sanctions end up economically separate Italy from France and Great Britain, and connect Italy even more closely with Germany, because Germany will always supply Italy with those raw materials that Italy doesn't have, and that no other country will sell to Italy because of the sanctions. And therefore you have, yes, the two fascist countries getting together, but they're also pushed together by economic reasons on the part of Italy. So Italy enters World War II in 1939. And the war, I think that you know a lot about World War II, so maybe I don't need to tell you what happens. Crisis in Italy, Mussolini gets deposed in 1943. He's arrested, he gets liberated by the Germans, and at that point, it is very clear what is going to happen. Germany is the powerful Nazi country. Italy is split in a civil war. The Germans are an occupying force. The Allied forces are starting to come in. It's a mess. Mussolini founds his own republic in northern Italy. And that lasts a little bit more than a year, the Republic of Salò, which is very interesting because 6,000 women will show up in this Republic of Salò to serve the nation, because fascism managed to link nationalism so closely with fascism that in abandoning Mussolini, for a lot of people feels like abandoning the nation. And therefore, here we go, people. A lot of Italians decide not to. Italian soldiers get captured, are sent to concentration camps because they're considered deserters and not prisoners of war. A mess. Italy, 1943, signs the armistice, and the day after declares war to Germany. If you want to add confusion to this, please feel free. And then Germany gets defeated in 1945. Now, you're probably asking yourself the question, why is fascism so popular still now? Because there are similar conditions that exist now that are very similar to Europe after World War I. Economic crisis. 2, women occupying more and more positions of power and therefore infringing in an idea of masculinity that has worked very well for men. Sorry to be so blatant until now. You have the promise of people who use the same type of populism. 5, fascism will always allow men to use violence. Violence is attractive because it is instinctive and tells you that things are solved by violence, and it is your right as a man, and in particular right now as a white man, to use that violence. It does not ask you to think. It allows you to wear a uniform, so it gives you an identity. It is, of course, an identity that is performative. You perform that identity by wearing that uniform, but it gives you an identity. It creates a mass, so you have a community of people that will behave exactly the same way. It abolishes dialogue. It abolishes freedom of speech. Freedom of speech does not exist. If you say something I don't like, I'll punch you. I'll kill you. Fascism gives you the license to do it. So in a way, fascism, I think, never died. World War II did not kill fascism. And we saw very public and publicized trials of fascists. But what about people? What about the mass? They were never paid for supporting fascism, did they? No. I mean, they starved for a while after the Second World War. In Italy, There were a lot of killings carried out by resistance fighters after the war, because Italy embraced the idea that that was a period of history that will never happen again. And therefore, there was an armistice after the other. There were not even trials that would sentence a fascist to jail. There were a few, but not that many. And whoever was put in jail was also liberated quite quickly. And the person who signed this armistice was the Justice Minister, Palmiro Togliatti, who's also the leader of the Communist Party. So why didn't the Americans or the Brits or the French impose that these people would be punished? 1945, 1946, the enemy is communism, is not fascism. Nobody cared about fascism. Okay, done. You know, oh, you were a fascist, fine, run to Argentina, come to the United States, go to Canada. The Vatican sets up a network that will help the former Nazis or fascists to leave the country. Nobody is actively punishing the fascists after World War II. It will take 30 years after the war, or maybe 20 after the war, for the discussion of what the ordinary person did during World War II, during Nazism, because the children will ask that question. Mom, Dad, what did you do? And it's during the 60s. It will be in the 60s with the students' movement, with the young people coming up with very substantive questions. And then you know what will happen. It also helps the fact that in Italy in the 1950s and 60s, there is an attempt to coup d'etat after the other. The biggest one will be in 1970, and these are all fascist attempts of the coup d'etat. In the 1970 exactly, the biggest one will be attempted. Fascists invade the parliament and then they stop. And the acts, the documents are secret. We still don't know exactly why they stopped. But it is also one of the reasons why internal left-wing terrorism was developed in Italy. It saw itself as, again, the resistance movement that fought against the Nazis between 1943 and 1945, because they seriously believe the fascism is coming back. It's not that the Christian Democrats during their regime after the war did much about it. Italy is part of the Atlantic Pact. It will receive an enormous amount of money from the United States. And at this point, the United States does not care about condemning or judging the Nazis. Communism is the beginning of the Cold War. That is the obsession in the Western world that pays attention to. The result is what we see now. And what you have in front of you is a map of neo-fascism in the world, in Europe right now, where it was born. Look how the incidents of neo-fascist violent attempts against people and things are on the increase. And the first position is Germany. Look at them, both in fatal incidents and in the total incidents. You have Greece with Golden Dawn, which is again anti-immigrant, anti-gay, anti-women. There you go. Italy, of course. Of course there is Italy. There are parties in Italy that have embraced a rhetoric that is very close to fascism, besides having extra parliamentary movements that are clearly neo-Nazis, but there are also ingredients of fascism that are there in certain right-wing parties. There is Britain. Look at Britain. I mean, Britain had a fascist movement with Mosley, which was quite powerful right there. And it also enticed a lot of intellectuals and writers. Come on, Virginia Woolf was a sympathizer of fascism for a certain amount of years. So yes, France, Sweden, right? Even Sweden, who theoretically was neutral during World War II, but actually, as I spent 4 years studying Swedish and its culture, it was actually in many ways pro-German. Finland, you have examples. Then you have Austria. Oh my God, right-wing parties in Austria have been particularly successful. And some of the fascist ideals are still alive there. And even Norway, that we look at as a socialist country. Do not ever put socialism and fascism together. They have nothing in common from a ideological point of view, as far as we can talk about ideology in fascism. They're very, very, very different things. Don't be tricked by the fact that Mussolini was originally a socialist. It is a complete separation between the two. Those democratic ideals that sustain socialism, even in the form that we think of right now, democratic socialism, completely disappear in fascism. And with this, I probably spoke way too much, and you probably have a number of questions you want to ask. So maybe, Tricia, you can allow them to speak, or to send me a chat question.
Yep.
And I will.
Yeah, if people, if you can use the hand raise feature, click on the blue hand icon, and then I can unmute you if you want to ask your question, or you can type it into the chat. There's a couple questions in the chat already.
Okay.
A couple people have just asked, there's a few people asking about just comparisons to
the
today.
US in the new fascist chart in compared to European country. Yes, I mean, of course, it all gets so complicated because being fascism, an entity that does not have a detailed, clear ideology, you don't know where it ends and where it begins. So are we saying, are we bringing the Ku Klux Klan into fascism? Racism is there, violence is there, maleness is there. So when we're talking about fascism in different cultures, what are we bringing in? So we can say, okay, this is a violent episode carried out by a movement that could be connected to fascism. Does it call itself fascist? No, but there's a splintering of this. I mean, look at how fascism transformed itself in Latin American dictatorships, right? We could call them fascist dictatorships, but let's look at the ingredients. Let's look at how it functions. Let's look at what kind of populism we're talking about. Do African dictatorship copy structures that belong to fascism? Absolutely. It is within a cultural, historical context. Is very different from what created fascism. So fascist components of fascism are always there. And when we see a violent episode, we can probably pull out the ingredients that connected to fascism. And then there are, even in the United States, those who had a Nazi cross on their forehead that will commit violent crimes, and they're clearly, doing it in the name of fascism. But it's sort of scattered, it's sort of an ingredient that can be disseminated in very different contexts. So a ton of violent episodes in Italy that may be in the United States, that may be considered violent episodes that are connected to fascism. If it's fascism in Italy dressed in black, why are Antifa members the US dressing in black? Because they're connected to anarchists. In a way, fascism stole the color black from the anarchists. It was the color of the anarchists. And Antifa is connected to somehow the anarchist movement. and don't go into a facile interpretation of anarchism. Anarchism is the kind of movement that has a very strong ideological background, and it was particularly powerful in countries whose economy was based on agriculture, like Italy, like Spain, for example. Italian socialism in particular comes out of anarchism. It shares quite a lot of anarchist ideology, in particular in believing in structures of power that are small, not so much in the complete destruction of power, but in those construction of power structures that are nuclear. They are connected to a very specific territory, that are small, that are run by the members of that particular community. So anarchism is a lot more interesting as a movement. And it's true, they had a black scar, or actually a black tie that they would tie a scarf around there. And Antifa is going back to that. If you're talking about the Nazis, the shirts were brown, the brown shirts, which was the private police at the beginning. So it's this use of colors. How does one resist the fight against the irrational appeal of fascism? Can you really fight the irrational with reason? Not really, no, because they're gonna punch you. You know, you cannot reason with somebody who has embraced irrationality. It just doesn't work. You're just working with two different weapons. Like he or she is fighting with a sword and you're fighting with a pear. It's very, very different. How do you resist fascism? You vote. And you protect the right to vote. That is very important. If you don't vote, you're doing what violent fascists or whatever other people want you to do, not participate in public life. There you go, participate in public life. The other thing that is very important, you pay attention. You pay attention to the weakest and most vulnerable members of your society. Your context is as strong as the weakest member of your context. So if you don't pay attention to the rights of the weakest, the rights of people who are different, and you defend their rights, then you have a problem. Because then you allow an exclusionary approach to how to govern that leads you on the wrong path, because it will exclude groups and it will create, again, another mass that belong, and everybody else can be persecuted, can be put in jail, can be killed, because they're not the same as that mass. But the most practical things that you can do is go vote and be on alert of what's happening in your country, and raise your children, teaching them to read as much as possible, to inform themselves as much as possible, but also to treasure knowledge in all its form, not just scientific knowledge that will give you a higher salary than reading a novel. Develop a critical sense of what reality is and your approach to reality. Read the world critically. Never take anything as it comes face value. Always critically approach that. And children have to learn this. If they learn it when they are 6 years old, 10 years old, they will see the world through a critical lens, and they will never say, oh, that person was elected and now I'm behind that person. Never, ever, ever. That person was elected and I have a problem with that because. So education is important. We have to invest in education. Education has to be there, you know, give people the tool in order to think critically and not just respond emotionally to something that is fascinating. There is an article that is called Fascinating Fascism. Yes, fascism is fascinating. It's performative. It's a performer all the time. It gives you freedoms that you didn't know you had. You can go kill somebody and nothing happens to you. So I don't know if this is an answer that is useful, but there's no easy answer of what to do with fascism. You have to deal with it on very different fronts. What was I afraid of? Fighting with a pair. We are, in a way, fighting with a pair. Voting, paying attention, you know. Okay, all right. I don't think I see any more questions.
We're pretty much out of time.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so there's
James Wood is waving his hand. So I don't know what that means.
Oh, I can see, okay.
Maybe he doesn't want to use the chat and he wants to say something. Okay, I can hear
him. You very quickly, you've got less than a minute, James.
I would like to commend 2 books by the man Tim Snyder at Yale. One is called On Tyranny. It's a little pamphlet. And the other one is called The Road to Unfreedom, because I think he brings the points you're making right up to the minute.
Right. There's also Stanley, who's a professor at Yale too, who has written a useful book. It's a very dry book about fascism and what to do about fascism. So you can look at that. There are a ton of good books out there. The Albright book is a little bit disappointing.
Yeah.
Anna Arendt books on totalitarianism, fantastic. On violence, it's fantastic. And also it has a really good book about the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. And it has a previous section in which she really documents step by step the persecution of the Jews. So there are a million books out there, really a million books. Thank you everybody for listening to me. I hope that it was useful. If not, tough luck, because I captured your attention for more than an hour. So thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. On behalf of New Hampshire Humanities, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. If you'd like to support our work, including these Humanities to Go online presentations, you can visit nhhumanities.org/give for more information. And while you're on our website, make sure you sign up for our weekly email newsletter, Human Ties, which contains the information and links to register for our online programs. Tonight, you'll receive another email from me with a link to take a survey, and we appreciate your feedback. We hope you'll join us for more upcoming programs. Next week, we've got New Hampshire author J.W. Oker, who's going to talk about odd things he's seen in New Hampshire. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good night. Thank you, Graziella.
You're welcome.